What is up, ladies and gentlemen? But most of all, you ladies out there, thanks for clicking on another episode of Break the Silence. I am your host, Cyborg. The Nets coaching carousel continues. Let's talk about it. Split cow! Okay, so we had massive news today out of the NBA. Reported that Steve Nash and the Brooklyn Nets decided to mutually agree to part ways. This was something that we potentially saw coming, something we kind of thought maybe was going to happen in the offseason. But there's so much to talk about here, and there's really three layers I want to talk about. I want to talk about Steve Nash. I want to talk about this Ime Udoka thing because it sounds like he's potentially going to be their next coach. And I also want to talk about the culture of the Brooklyn Nets because I think that's such an important conversation that we need to have. So let's dive straight into it here because I really have so many thoughts on this that I want to get out. So bear with me and, listen along. Let me know what you think. In terms of some of the topics, because I'm going to talk about more broad sports, talking about culture in sports, I think the importance of that. But first, please take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. We are almost at 500 subscribers. Can't wait to get there. Appreciate all the support. Let's keep grinding, y'all. But let's start with this. I am someone who doesn't believe in curses. I believe in culture. And what I mean by that is that good organizations find ways to win, and bad organizations will find ways to lose. When you're looking at a team like the Chicago Cubs that for so many years had this alleged curse on them, to me, it's not that there's some supernatural force that's causing them to lose games. But when you get in a tight game and when palms get sweaty and you maybe have an off night, you're struggling, what enters the back of your mind? It's the organization you play for. And this is something that I've talked about so much as a Cleveland Browns fan. Not necessarily that not that every quarterback the Browns has ever drafted have been bad, but they walk into a bad organization that's poorly ran with a losing culture. And as a sports fan, we see this so often. Tom Brady. Okay, so Tom Brady's greatest attribute to me is the confidence he instills in the rest of his teammates that, hey, we got that guy. We got that guy, and we see it so often in sports. You see players that maybe weren't as good or units that weren't as good when they get certain guys. The Cincinnati Bengals were an organization that struggled for years. They would squeak into the playoffs, get smoked in the first round. They add a guy like Joe Burrow, and now their defense plays better. Their skill position players look better. And all these things look like they got better, even though sometimes the personnel didn't change. But it's the belief and the culture that those players bring in with them that, hey, we got that guy. You know what? We got a chance because we got Tom Brady on our squad. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers think they have a chance because they have Tom Brady on their football team. And I think that's the most valuable thing that those players add to professional sports organizations. Now, let's talk about this in reference to the Brooklyn Nets. Firing Steve Nash in this total carousel of a team, you look at the culture for the Brooklyn Nets, almost on New Jersey Nets, because I was just looking up some of their old statistics before this video here. But the culture is so poor when you're talking about what Kyrie Irving has done. What Kevin Durant requesting a trade, demanding the firing of these players. Sean Marks has come in and done a very poor job. We're gonna break down that a little bit more, but culture is so important in the NBA. When you look at the records of these NBA teams so far, the Sacramento Kings are trying to win basketball games, and they're not. The San Antonio Spurs are trying to lose basketball games to get Victor Wembanyama, and they're freaking winning them. They're freaking winning because I think that culture is so important in coming into a winning culture, winning organization. And that's what I think that the Brooklyn Nets greatly lack. They need a leader in the organization, someone who's going to come in and exude confidence, but also stability. And that's what I don't think they have right now. So let's talk about Steve Nash for a minute and what he walked into here in Brooklyn. Because the big storyline when Steve Nash got hired, and I've talked about before, I don't like to call out, and this is not critiquing any other analysts or anything like that, but Stephen A. Smith went on First Take and pointed out that because Steve Nash was a white coach, he got an opportunity to be with a team. He was basically saying that a black coach wouldn't get this same opportunity of such talent. And the only reason I bring that up is not to dispute anything Stephen A is saying, and this is not at all about race to me. But I think we totally misunderstood the hand that Steve Nash was dealt in Brooklyn. You're talking about an organization that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant came in, and Kyrie Irving openly said, hey, we don't need a coach. Maybe one night I can coach. One night Kevin Durant can coach. What organization is ran like that? What in this world, what business does an employee come in and say, we don't even need bosses? We don't need someone who's organizing it, who's putting us in positions to succeed, because that's what a coach is supposed to do. Put you in positions to highlight the best parts of your skill set. That's the job of a boss. That's the job of a coach. And when Kyrie Irving says something like that, he's immediately undermining the authority of Steve Nash. And Steve Nash came into an organization that had Kyrie Irving, who thought he was above the team, above the organization, thinks so many things, and just sees himself as more than he is as far as a basketball sense. And that made it to where I don't think Steve Nash had a real chance. I don't know what you were supposed to do with this squad. Kyrie and Kevin Durant came in. They asked for Kenny Atkinson to be fired. I think we all agree that when you're looking at NBA organizations especially, star players are kind of deciding who's coaching their team. If LeBron doesn't want a person coaching his team, he can certainly make that decision. So Kenny Atkinson, who had made the playoffs 2 years in a row with the Nets, then is fired after Kyrie's first year. And if you remember, Kevin Durant was sitting out with his Achilles injury from the finals. And that team had made the playoffs back-to-back years and was kind of looking like maybe they had some juice. They had D'Angelo Russell, who was playing well, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert. They then fire Kenny Atkinson, and then into the next season, pretty early on, James Harden starts to be clearly that he wants out of Houston. And the Nets then decide to do, I believe it was a 3-team deal, but they got rid of Karis LeVert and Jared Allen and ended up with James Harden. And that's something, again, that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant wanted to do. They also were the two that picked Steve Nash. Those two guys made the decision to bring in Steve Nash as their head coach. Which is why it's so crazy that Kevin Durant was then requesting him to be fired, but we'll get to that in a second. But the Brooklyn Nets bring in James Harden. They have Kyrie Irving. They have Kevin Durant. James Harden had openly quit on the Houston Rockets. Now, maybe you don't see that as a negative, but when you're talking about culture that I just talked about a second ago, quitting on your team is certainly not something that builds a winning culture and I'm going to grind it out, I'm going to work no matter what, we're going to give it all we got kind of culture. And then all this mess that Kyrie has going on, and he's out with injuries. Kevin Durant's kind of coming off his Achilles injury, coming back, rounding into form. And this organization is just a total mess because they've got rid of Jared Allen and Karis LeVert. And you know what's interesting? You know who's the second best team in the Eastern Conference right now? Jared Allen and Karis LeVert's team. Just keep that in mind. And then they go through this season. They actually have a chance in the playoffs. But what I always say is when you're talking about the importance of playing together and chemistry, and yes, maybe you want to blame injury for them losing to the Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs. And you would say if Kevin Durant's foot was just an inch back, they win that series and maybe they make the NBA Finals. Yes, if the Los Angeles Clippers with Kawhi Leonard hadn't sat out 45 games, maybe they don't blow a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. Yes, these things are all conversations that we can have that, yeah, well, the Clippers were close, the Nets were close. The importance of chemistry, of playing together, of building that camaraderie with your teammates, is so important. And that's what we saw. That's why we saw Golden State take home the championship this year, because their chemistry is unmatched. The way that they play with Draymond Green, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson. The Brooklyn Nets, then the next year, James Harden then again quits on the Brooklyn Nets because of a lot of COVID vaccine drama. And I don't want to get into that, but Kyrie Irving is sitting out all the home games, and you're just talking about this total mess. What was Steve Nash supposed to do with this roster? Like legitimately, you have your star player sitting out. You have another star player quitting. You then trade him for another star, former All-Star in Ben Simmons, who won't play. And don't even get me started on this year. He looks like a disaster. But last year wouldn't play. So you're talking about having one of the best basketball players of all time, probably one of the 20 best basketball players of all time in Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving, who's a total mess. James Harden, who's a total mess. Ben Simmons, who's a total mess. No big men. And questionable health with Joe Harris and Seth Curry missing a bunch of games. People who want to critique Steve Nash, to me, he is just being the fall guy for this. Sean Marks has been the GM of this team since 2016. And I think any time that you let your players make a majority of the decisions, it kind of ends up in a bad situation. We're seeing that with the Los Angeles Lakers, with LeBron kind of making the decisions to get Russell Westbrook, maybe Anthony Davis. And now you're looking at, is this team a mess? And is it going to be a mess for the next 5 years because you don't have your draft picks or any real assets to rebuild this squad? And I think that's the thing that we look at, and the importance in having a GM with a strong voice who, yes, will talk to the players about certain things. You don't want to bring in a coach that LeBron hates, but yes, that's ultimately the GM's decision. And Sean Marks is now making Steve Nash the fall guy, and it said it was a mutual decision, whatever you want to believe there. But, and I actually have a thought with this Udokah thing that makes me think it wasn't as much of a mutual decision. But Sean Marks has clearly not done a good job, and he's trying to protect his job by firing Steve Nash. Maybe that's the answer. My guess is that it will not be. Let's move on quickly to this Ime Udoka thing, because I know that I've talked a lot about this. I know that I've been on here for a minute here, but Ime Udoka, how did the Brooklyn Nets hire him so quickly? It was reported Steve Nash and them mutually parted ways. And then about an hour later, it was reported that they were hiring Ime Udoka. And Sean Marks came out and said that they haven't officially hired Ime. So maybe that's not the case. So if that ends up being false, then you can disregard this. But at the moment, that's what they're reporting. That's what Shams and Woj are reporting. And so there were two possible options for how he got hired so quickly. One, they did no research into whatever happened in Boston. They just didn't care at all, which is poor management. Or they were talking to Ime while Steve Nash was still the coach, which is also terrible management. Let's talk to your potential replacement while you're still coaching, while we're trying to win basketball games. So those are the only two possibilities. That one, you either were doing an investigation into Ime because you knew you were moving on from Steve Nash, which then gave him no real chance, and I don't understand why you'd bring a guy in to coach for 7 games to start a year. Or you're totally disregarding any of those problems that he had in Boston, or whatever happened in Boston that caused him to be suspended for an entire year, a coach that just took his team to the finals. And again, I'm not accusing Ime of anything, and I'm not getting into it, but it at least deserves some sort of investigation, some sit down, some conversations. And the only last point, why were the Celtics so willing to get rid of Ime? Why were they so it's being reported that they didn't get any sort of compensation back. Now, you could say that they just didn't want to keep paying him, and maybe that's the case, but they traded Jason Kidd a couple years, not the Celtics, but Jason Kidd was traded a couple years ago for 2 second-round picks. So we've seen organizations trade their coaches. In fact, I believe the Celtics traded Doc Rivers to the Clippers years ago. And so we've seen coaches traded. I'm a little surprised. I just you're going from a total mess to And Ime Udoka I really like. He took the Celtics defense from 14th the previous year to second last year. And that's really impressive. So maybe he can take the Nets from 30th ranked defense to the 25th or something like that. But I don't know that he can come in and change the culture. This terrible culture with a poor GM, in my opinion, that's poorly constructed a roster that's not very good and has been focused more on the glitz and the glams and the star power rather than, Jared Allen, who actually brings real value to a team that's trying to win basketball games. I don't know what I don't know what the Nets are trying to do here. I don't know why you'd have a coach start the season and coach 7 games before you fire him or mutually part ways. Did Steve Nash not know that they weren't listening to him after last year? Like, did he think they were going to come back and Kyrie was going to be like, oh yeah, Steve Nash, I'm listening to you now? Or did the ownership of the Nets think that they were going to be really good to start the season? To me, I knew the Nets weren't going to be very good. I knew the Lakers weren't going to be very good. What did you expect? I think our expectations were too high. A ton of people picked the Nets to win the championship. Just total bullcrap. That's just, media hype. But that's all I got for now. I know I unloaded quite a bit there, but appreciate y'all watching. Let me know some of your thoughts as to the whole situation in the comments. But Cyborg out.